doesn't want to look at me while I talk.
Do you want to, is there a way you can scoot back so you can reach your grand's car? Yeah.
Alright, we all set?
If we went into our link claims, it's internally to your gender advantage. You can see the structural violence of 100 million people being killed each year due to gender violence, as well as the notion that it allows the structural cause of extinction. You can see a couple of disadvantages. First of all, ethics disadvantage in Percy Brown in 96 evidence indicates that you believe that women will be set free from the truth. They are only allowed legal remedies under the access to law, that will allow them to escape the disciplinary power of the state in a way that allows them to manifest themselves in resistance to domestic violence. Our evidence is on point. It's how saying this merely exposes women's private lives to the biopolitical apparatus of the state. This is not a traditional biopolitics. Our impact is not totalitarianism. Our internal link evidence literally says that this is what allows structural violence to be embedded against women. You've also seen a liberalism link argument that all your notions of human rights merely assume that there is a liberal human subjectiveness that has rights applied to it. Our evidence is this is always co-opted in terms of international norms, which means even if you win some sort of internal link to the advantages is irrelevant in the context of all of our link arguments. Also, you can see the regulation just said that even if you win the you agree to decrease some sort of regulation over the female body and the violence enacted against her, that there are coercive ways it's manipulated externally of the woman, i.e. whenever a woman comes to the court and the notion of Violence Against Women Act and she assumes that telling the truth of her experience sets her free from the notion of the denial of agency and the status quo, that opens up the tale of her life to further biopolitical apparatus. Think about it this way. The court determines the validity of the woman's story. The court determines whether or not that fits a correct model that would fit under the Commerce Clause. The court determines what kind of remedy that woman gets. All of those experiences are no longer just a personal method of trauma, but they've been exposed in a way that is regulatory external to the woman. This is internally turned your agency argument. You've also conceded the impact evidence that says that the trauma is sad, that the idea that you imbue women's identity in the form of trauma is what allows structural violence to happen against them in the first place, which means we will functionally, with not only the AFSO, it doesn't solve, but it allows that violence to continue, but it perpetuates the notion of liberalism. 2AC number 2, they say that telling stories empowering key to agency. You should read this evidence. It really talks about how it gives them a sense of agency in Human Rights Commission trials first. You have no evidence that parallels this in terms of Violence Against Women Act, or our evidence is specific to the notion of sexual assault in the status quo. Second, cross-apply the ethics argument as well as the regulation argument. It doesn't matter if there's a sense of agency. You have conceded that this is really another link internally to our criticism argument. Argument is in fact that women are given a sense of agency. They feel they have been empowered, but this is all in actuality a facade. We will also win some ethical net benefits of silence that I'll articulate below, but the use of liberal subject informing the emancipation of women ensures the inherent masculinized nature of subjects not challenged, rather reiterated. This internally turns your selfhood and citizenship Caldwell argument, Brown in 95. Liberal subject immersive pervasively maxes not only its founding institution stratifications, contemporary discourse alike, these are the attributes of liberal person and liberal justice established by assuming certain means certain dimensive activity, purview liberalism, confidence, universalism, purpose, persistence, reproduce the exclusion of humanism, the elements of liberalism, universalism, problem of yours, on the depoliticization of indigenous social powers, also it's often celebration of fictional sovereignty and subverting having substance, female difference and subordination. Feminism is trapped. The trap consists in working with formulations of personhood, citizenship, and politics that themselves contain women's subordination that can indeed be extended to women or to activities inside the family, but are not thereby emancipated from their masculinism by virtue of such extension, to the extent that many elements of women's subordination are tied to a division of labor that does not require biological women to occupy the position assigned to the gender. The emancipation of particular women be purchased through the subordination of substitutes. The gender terms of political discourse solicit the production of bourgeois feminism that emancipates certain women to participate in the terms of masculinist justice without emancipating genders formed from these terms. Gender class converge here is very middle and upper class women knows who's purchased or living person is quality field child care and household help by providing women earning a fraction of their boss's wage, and the inevitability of racism in the law is not an answer to this argument. This is a uniqueness argument about how even if this happens now, you only make it a uniquely more privatized experience that is allowed to be politicized in a way that allows a white caste legal system. Also, even if we lose the racism argument, this is just one manifestation of the impact. We'll still win the gender violence argument. You said the civil society is key. Cross-apply the argument I made above us is that you have an assumption that if you extend the value of liberalism to women, that somehow that in familial relations, that will somehow create a side of emancipation, but you refuse to believe the law is itself codified in the idea of masculinity, the notion that the truth can set us free, and that the experience of trauma, once it is properly adjudicated, will somehow be an adequate remedy to women is what allows this masculine manipulation to happen in the first place. I've already explained the argument above. They say permutation be the plan of the alternative. This is a severance permutation. This is functionally the same as permuting a counter plan to ban the plan. Our alternative is to remain silent, reject the affirmative, to be silent in the notion, which means that you can never do VAWA under the way that they conceptualize VAWA under the terms of the world of the alternative argument, because women will still have to come to the court. This is the Picard 2003 evidence that is not answered on the case debate. This masculinist assumption of what constitutes valid versus invalid discursive struggles all right, and says that silence can be emancipatory because it closes off space for traumatic experiences to have to form identity in the subformation of the subject, as well as it closes off space for external actors to influence the subjectivity of a woman, which is the entire thesis of your Caldwell in 2002 evidence from the 1AC. This is a damning argument because you have conceded that this is what allows the structural conditions for extinction to exist in status quo. You say we must engage in the state to break it down. This is the Chomsky argument. We want a couple of arguments first. We are not a rejection of the state. We are a rejection in the way that you engage the state. This evidence does not speak to the notion of domestic violence and the way that women should occupy it. We are not a rejection of all ideas of law. We are merely a rejection of the assumption and the affirmative advantage that the law can provide some sort of objective recourse whereby when women are taken out of the private and into the public, that will somehow liberate themselves into a system of international human rights law. This is an asinine claim to say that this means we reject all notions of the state. No, we merely reject the way you engage the state, which means this is not a unique offense. You say the impact's inevitable. This argument is answered above. The theory debate will be in the one and are they to read this McKinnon card. This is rejecting objection true would lead to allow things like rape and the Holocaust. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard because we do not reject the objective notion of truth. In fact, we do believe that there is a notion of truth. You've conceded the Brown and 96 link evidence that says that that truth is one of self-definition, which is what your Caldwell in 2002 evidence assumes you can do to solve. But if we win any of these internal link arguments, it proves that you deny the notion of an objective truth because you allow subjective external decision-making to determine the validity of a woman's claim and whenever she has reparations about violence against women in her name under the law. You say infinite number of private actors, that'll be in the one and are. You say that we cannot prove that silence is possible and that the law is inevitable. I've already used the law inevitability arguments, but I've already extended the original alternative solvency evidence. Here's more evidence. Silence is not an all-end-all be-all solution to discourse of power, but entails the desire for freedom. We must navigate the divide by silencing our confessional normalizing discourse while learning the capacity for speech that doesn't offer an explanation or declaration of identity, but a contestable story and side of resistance. Brown in 96. The question is where Mrs. claiming of violence and telling off in the political space we claim to break political science, how to tell the truth about spousal abuse, the political neutral discourse can in a way we be read as well the problematic remnant of woman's own history of subordination, the more generic gender anxieties of our time. It would seem that our capacity to be silent in certain venues might be a measure of our desire for freedom, including a desire to resist the discourse of anxiety. Such desire needs to be able to distinguish between the pleasures of silence and habituation of being silenced with the other. This desire would lead to learn the capacity to speak and to do so in ways that are neither confessional nor normative. One challenge to the convention of equating speaking with power and silence and powerlessness pertains to the practice of refusing to speak as a mode of resistance. Even as silence is a response to domination is not enforced from above, but rather deployed from below. Refusing to speak is a method of refusing colonization. The historical political space of silence for collective subjects emerging into history is this cross one, a plane of potentially pleasurable reprieve and newly acquired zones of freedom and privacy, yet a place of freedom from that is not yet freedom to make the world. This evidence is damning about how their conceptualization that silence can only allow the continuation of domination is a masculinist contest that is rooted in a regulatory apparatus that privileges the male above the female. They say that women cannot ignore the state. We are answering this argument above. Also, even if they win this argument that women should ignore the state, we are reading specific evidence about the way that they allow women to employ the state, which means you should have a comparative advantage to your method of deploying the state versus what we say. You said the state will take over and read this Boggs in 97 evidence. First, this is an irrelevant argument because we are winning uniqueness on this debate. You can see the state will take over more in the world of the affirmative plan. The very thesis of the affirmative is that we will politicize the private and the notion of the public realm, which means there's only a net increase in the notion of the state taking over. There's also no impact scenario to this argument. A world in which they don't win uniqueness. They have conceded that we internally link term the biggest advantage that they have in the realm, the notion of structural general violence that allows 100 million people to be destroyed each year because of gender violence. They say there's no impact to biopower. I've already answered this argument at the top. This evidence just says the biopower is not all bad, but our biopolitical scenario is the idea that allows structural violence to happen against women. It's not a totalitarianism or a government scenario, which means that this does not disprove anything. If we're merely conceding your internal link argument that this is the root cause of all violence, which means we are internally link turning the argument and continue to incorporate women into the political sphere via laws or methods to assimilate the female body in a male-dominated system of law. This fails. Gates 96. Feminist work shown neutral bodies about little states, simplicity, masculine body, legal political arrangements, women and with the occasional surrounding legislative investment, returning abortion, rape, and maternity allowance, so on. None of these in sex, female body, seriously, still the exception, the deviation, dividing literally margin, man's representation, man's bottom, morality, formalized system of ethics, strategies, and system terms, the image of political body, image of woman's body, difference, interpretive evidence, woman's and accuracy, political sphere. Women are now admitted to the public sphere. If women want to escape domestic confinement, they often gain more of a cause, we can cure mere animal system by becoming men, cured of hysteria by hysterectomy. There's a lot more to be said about this exclusion, but when the formalized principles that quite equity can address a woman's use in this body, she is limited in what she can say. She lives by this reason, ethics, she still lives from the body of another.
Okay, I know your partner's going to take the theory arguments, but just because since this is our last cross-ex, who will be silent in the world of your alternative?
Our argument is going to be that it's a question of competing intellectual ideas. We're not going to fiat that everyone is silenced. We're merely saying that we're merely asking Matt Moore to vote against the thesis of the affirmative advantage.
I still don't understand. Your argument is just intellectually, so
Right, you're asking me questions about how it would be normatively deployed, but one of
Yeah.
our link arguments is that those questions are what allow women to have violence committed against them in the first place, so we're clearly not.
How are you controlling uniqueness? In the status quo, women have no recourse. In the status quo, women are silent, but that silence is not opening anything.
They're
It's
not
just leaving
silent
continuum.
in the status quo. See, there's a difference between silence and subordination, and our evidence makes this distinction very well. Your assumption is that anytime a woman is not heard in the name of the law, she is inherently subordinate to men. Our evidence says that that is a false dichotomy
Which
because
piece
there
of
are...
evidence indicates that women are not silent now? What type of recourse are they trying to achieve in the status quo?
I don't know what type of recourse they're trying to achieve.
I don't understand how your alternative is not different than the status quo.
Because
Women
our
are not
alternative
engaging
sets
along the
up,
status
our
quo.
alternative sets up our explanation of the type of silence he's endorsing.
I understand
That's why
that
I'm
your
trying to
alternative sets
explain
up
to you
the
this
explanation.
distinction.
But why is your alternative any different? How is your intellectual endorsement not being achieved in the status quo?
Because
Why are
in the
women not
status
silent?
quo, the women are not silenced in the same way
Yes,
as
they
the
are.
alternative. No, they aren't.
How
Not
is it
going to
different?
the court in the notion of domestic violence is
They're-
not a form
that
of
is the
silence.
only form of silence
It is a
that
form of
even changes
subordination.
from the
Our
status quo. The
evidence
only
says
thing
that
determinative
just
changes
because
is
women
the
are
court.
accessing the VAWA now does not mean that the situation of rape does not occur and is not legally
Now,
defined in
how does
terms
the
of the
affirmative
court.
change silence other than changing whether or not women can go to the court? That's the only
This is our
difference.
link argument.
I
You
understand
have an
it's a link
assumption that
argument,
going from the
but you're-
private to the public is the ability to solve. This
Right,
is the
that
link
the
argument
only
we are
way the
indicting.
affirmative changes the concept of whether or not
Yes.
silence exists in the
And the
status quo.
alternative changes the way that silence is deployed in the status quo,
How?
which means your
What is your
UQ
difference
argument.
between the status quo? What
This
can
is what
women
I tried
not
to
do in
explain
the
at the
world?
beginning, and you told me I was stupid and irrelevant.
No,
This is
I
why I've
didn't.
been trying to say it since the beginning of class six.
What is different in the alternative than the
In the world of the alternative, it's not that women are forced to not go to the courts, it's that they can make the autonomous choice to not go to the court. Our evidence says that you can imbue yourself in the emancipatory
Our affirmative
potential of
allows them to
silence.
make the autonomous choice.
Our argument is that your belief that the truth will set them free whenever you make
If they want it to,
You're-
if they
no, the entire
autonomously
thesis
choose
of
to.
your agency argument you make in the 2AC, the entire point of that evidence is that women will go to human rights trials in the U.S. and be
But
exposed
it's
internationally to the notion of gender violence.
How
Our
does the
evidence also
affirmative
says,
not allow that
hold
autonomous
on. Our argument is also that you holistically believe that every woman that chooses to do that will be emancipated, but that's a false
We
claim.
think that they should have that choice to do so.
Oh, that's great. We're contesting this argument.
Right.
I mean, I understand we disagree. That's the whole purpose of the debate round.
It's the theory stuff in order